Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before we get started, I'll just hand over to Rebecca for some housekeeping.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that this meeting is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. The meeting may also be recorded or streamed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public, although ultimate discretion in this matter lies with the Chair in case of disruption. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by the way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point, which is in the front car park of this building. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. For those in the room, this includes turning off microphones and turning the volume down completely on your laptops. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. And then, first thing tonight, any apologies for the meeting?
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Councillor Vanessa Ricketts and Councillor Joe Clements.
Thank you. And any substitutes?
There are no substitute members.
Cool, thank you. And moving on to the third item, do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests on anything on the agenda tonight? No? Great. And then next is the minutes of the last meeting, which was the meeting we had on the 11th of September. Is everyone okay to accept those minutes? Great, thank you. And number 5, any public issues tonight, Rebecca?
There are no public issues, Chair.
Okay, brilliant. Straight into the go through tonight then. So item number 6 on the agenda is the recommendation from Council with regards to the Safe Accommodation Strategy Working Group, which was the request brought forward in a motion at the last full. Can I hand over to Lindsay just to give us a bit of an overview on exactly how we'll go through this, please?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, as you said, this is here because it's a recommendation from Council. Any suggestions for additions to a work plan are in the gift of the relevant committee to determine and should be considered in line with the requirements of the Constitution. But you may want to consider giving weight to the fact that this was supported by the full Council. When considering additions to your work programme, the Constitution requires an assessment of resources to undertake the work. So as you know, you've just finished a working group and you can undertake one working group at a time. You also need to take an assessment of the background to the issue proposed and consider the impact that can be had with the work. In terms of logistics for determining how you proceed with this suggestion, you may want to discuss this item and if minded to commission a working group, discuss the arrangements around membership tonight so that these could be established and the group can begin work prior to your next meeting, which isn't until February. An option would be that a final decision on membership could be delegated to you as chairman to determine. It would also be appropriate to agree principles around the key lines of inquiry today and delegate the decision to finalise the scope to the working group itself, if you were so minded. The committee will be aware that you have further new scrutiny suggestions to be considered later on tonight in your work plan item, including another suggestion from a councillor and suggestions from your budget working groups. So it may therefore be practical for the committee to have a substantive discussion around your views on the council proposal for scrutiny, but if minded to proceed, reserve prioritisation of the work for later in your agenda when you can consider all your scrutiny suggestions together. In terms of the scrutiny suggestion itself, this was proposed by Councillor Farr and amended by Councillor Canavan at Council. They've both been invited to attend tonight and provide the necessary background information for your consideration. And officers are also present to provide you with further information and suggestions on how scrutiny may add value to this area of work. So I'll hand over to you, Chair, to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Really clear. So what I'd like to do with this item is, first of all, to ask Councillor Farr, who proposed the motion, to speak and just introduce it to us a little bit, and then go on to Councillor Canavan, who put forward the amendment, which then made the substantive motion, which was passed, and then go to one of the officers, Tracy Kybert, who'll give a short presentation to us on the safe accommodation strategy as it is now, where we may be able to add value, what we might be able to do, and then I'll open it up for further discussion, whether we want to form a working group and what we'd want that to look like. And just as a reminder, the motion which came in, I'll just read it out so we're clear on exactly what it is that we're discussing. There's been no scrutiny of the decision to close Bournemouth's only women's refuge for those fleeing abusive relationships. We ask that the decision be examined as part of a cross-party working group to be established to oversee the finalisation of the Safe Accommodation and Commissioning Strategy report into the Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee in spring 20. That would fit with our February meeting if we were mandated to bring it into the work plan then, but we'll save that bit to the end, deciding exactly where we'll be. So, Councillor Farr, can I ask you to speak? We said about 3 minutes, but I won't be too strict on the timing, so please feel free.
Thank you, Chairman. Proposer of this motion to establish a working group, I'm pleased that it was passed unanimously by all members present at full council on the 4th of November. It is clear that decisions under the previous leader to close Bournemouth's only women's refuge lacks transparency. However, we are where we are. The most important thing is getting the policy right for vulnerable people escaping domestic abuse. As it stands, it is not clear to councillors or indeed members of the public. Excuse me, that's where I was. It's not clear to councillors or indeed members of the public that the policy is right or not, as that decision was made behind closed doors without any scrutiny at the time. Moving forward, we must ensure that process is clear and transparent with all the proper scrutiny. I'm not here to take part in the debate. However, will there be a discussion to agree terms of reference to the working group? Also, could we consider co-opting independent experts, Women's Aid, onto the proposed cross-party working group? As elected members of the council, in general, we're laymen. We all have varied professional backgrounds and may have passions for certain issues or perhaps lived experience. However, it's important to include independent experts when making policy. In closing, I hope members can support the proposed working group and agree the best way forward. Thank you.
Incredibly concise, thank you, Farr. Councillor Canavan online, do you want to add to that, please?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair, and apologies for not being in the room with you. I've got another meeting, so we'll probably have to leave during the course of your meeting. But I suspect, like others, I became aware of the proposed closure of the Bournemouth Women's Refuge following an article in the Bournemouth Echo. And following this, I sent a series of emails to both the director and the portfolio holder to better understand how this decision had been reached and why it had not been considered by Cabinet or at a scrutiny committee. And I was sent a copy of the officer decision record dated the 6th of June 2024, which outlines in some detail the reasons for the decision and the background. This paper sets out the consultation that had taken place and the options that had been considered. So my understanding is that the decision record was written in this way because it was not considered by officers to be a key decision. And it's also my understanding that this is a judgment made by the appropriate director in conjunction with the monitoring officer. And I think it is important to acknowledge that BCP employs officers to take decisions, although it's necessary to have in place criteria under which key decisions can be determined and referred to Cabinet or full council. And I know from my previous involvement with this that that judgment was made in good faith based on the assessment of the existing criteria. But my motivation in moving the amendment, Chair, was not to dwell on what had happened previously, but to understand it, move forward, and to try and influence policy and to make sure that BCP can provide safe accommodation to those fleeing domestic abuse. And members may recall the housing motion that I seconded at the council meeting on the 23rd of July. And this was an attempt by me to influence the development of the forthcoming housing strategy. And that motion outlined a series of issues which I felt needed to be considered. So similarly, with this particular issue, I became aware and it became apparent that a safer accommodation strategy was also being developed. And therefore, what I wanted to try and seek to do was ensure that suitable accommodation was provided. So within the officer decision record of the 6th of June, it was made clear that there would be future commissioning programme to provide such accommodation. and this will be in addition to the refuge based in Poole, and this accommodation may well look different to the previous refuge in Bournemouth, because it's felt more appropriate to seek to identify individual units to support residents into settled accommodation. So the amended motion carried at the meeting on the 4th of December was aimed at seeking to influence the safer accommodation strategy, and the idea of a cross-working group was included in the wording to better shape what this might look like. So I would like to ask this committee to invite group leaders to nominate members to sit on this working group, and the committee may also wish to consider inviting other scrutiny committees to be involved with the process also. The motion carried by Council looks to a report from the working group by spring 2025, so I feel this needs to be given priority in order to fulfil that decision. I should perhaps declare an interest as someone who believes strongly that housing is a crucial determinant of health, and there is plenty of evidence to show that homelessness, housing insecurity, deprivation, and poor or inadequate housing has a very significant impact on health and life expectancy. So if you're looking, Chair, for a volunteer to lead this working group, I would be very happy to do so. But finally, Chair, I just wanted to touch on what I feel should be included within the terms of reference for this working group, because I think it should include things like an examination of the demand, how BCP works with other local authorities regarding safe accommodation for those impacted by domestic abuse, the nature of the accommodation to be commissioned, how we might seek the views of those with lived experience, and what future arrangements will look like, and also the timescale around the commissioning process. So thank you, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity, and I welcome your consideration of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Canavan, and thank you for the offer as well to lead the group should we take her on. It's appreciated. Next, if I can welcome Tracy to the meeting, and Tracy, if you can give us an outline then on where we are at the moment, a short presentation on just the safe accommodation strategy as it currently stands and the work that you're doing, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Is it easiest for me to share my screen? There isn't a central
Yes, please.
place. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Can everyone see that now?
We can see that here now. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Thank you. We currently have 3 strategies which are being worked on. We have the overarching domestic abuse strategy, which is an updated version of the existing strategy. And we have 2 brand new strategies in draft, the safe accommodation strategy and the perpetrator strategy. Which will sit under the main domestic abuse strategy. The safe accommodation strategy is a legal requirement under the new Domestic Abuse Act, which came in 2021. The work leading up to this has included the independent safe accommodation needs assessment, which was commissioned in 2021, feedback from service users and stakeholders, and we have had a commissioning manager in post for 18 months, currently carrying out further work on the needs assessment and data. We have looked at also at national models and other local authority delivery models. As just previously been discussed, we've also looked at areas that the working group might want to focus on. So that would include scrutiny of the use of the evidence and research used to shape the draft strategy, scrutiny and involvement in the development of the engagement and consultation plan of the safe accommodation strategy, and scrutiny and involvement in development of the accommodation commissioning plan, which would sit under the safe accommodation strategy. The proposed timeline, which I think has been mentioned, but the consultation engagement will start in December, with a draft ready for scrutiny by March and Cabinet in April, and for all 3 strategies to go live 1st of May. Thank you.
Thank you very much. that's really, really helpful to outline where we're at the moment and also the timeline on it and where we might be able to get involved as well, should we choose to form the group. So I will open it up to the committee for any debate on this item or any suggestions. Councillor North, over.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I support the idea to have the working group, and I think one thing that I would be interested in is Councillor Farr said about Women's Aid being involved, and I think it would be really good to understand why they've had a public difference of opinion, and it would be great to have them in the same room as the council officers and councillors, just to really get to the bottom of that, because I think that needs to be done. Yeah. Also, I'd really like to be involved in this as well.
Thank you. Anyone else at this stage? Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? On that timeline you had shown up there, you talked about scrutiny in March, which is going to miss our February meeting. So I was just wondering when our next meeting was, if you want to get this live in May. I don't know if Rebecca can answer that.
Your next meeting after that, after February, is the 15th of May.
It just strikes me that we're slightly out of sync with this if we want to bring the working group back to the committee.
That is something which I just noticed on there as well. And to remind the committee as well, we are owed an additional meeting from the pre-election period where we skipped one. So there may be an opportunity, if time allows, to fit in another meeting within that period to get the full paper into scrutiny, as well as what the working group are doing. And Councillor Rice.
I was just wondering whether there's another way for the group to feedback by email or something, as opposed to actually needing to bring it to a meeting, if it prevented the work being done, if you know what I mean.
I think that's a valid point, particularly as Lindsay alluded to. We've got quite a busy work programme. We've got a few other requests for working groups as well, which we have come in. So it needs to be balanced with the other work which we're doing as well. So there may be, as part of our work plan later, if we choose to, how can I put this? If we choose to move forward with this group, we don't specifically need to say that this is the next item which we'll be dealing with, and we don't specifically need to deal with it in a way which it reports directly back to a meeting. It could report back in a different way as well. So there are options which we can discuss a little bit later. So one thing I was going to ask Tracy, if I may, I think there's been a bit of talk about either co-opting other external groups onto what we're doing, and I know the consultation's due to start from December. Is there a programme of who that consultation will be targeted towards, or will that be an open consultation? Is it somewhere we could look at bringing groups in to specifically target with the consultation to make sure we get responses from the groups who are mostly effective or who we believe might have the best input into this?
Yeah, I mean, it's not set in stone at the moment. It's in draft. We've concentrated on focus groups, but we can add to that. I don't see a problem with that.
Thank you. The reason I was asking that is I like the idea of bringing independent members, particularly with specialising, getting in the room and sitting down with them. But I'm also conscious of, if we're going to form a working group, how targeted and small we want it to be, and inviting one external agency with one opinion and not listening to others. Maybe it's better that we look and possibly use the group to look at people who will be able to assist us the most in this and make sure we target them within the consultation as one idea of the scoping work which the working group could bring forward. I don't know how people feel about that as an idea. Councillor Northover.
I think just Women's Aid, just because they did put a public statement saying, criticising council. So I just think it, just particularly them, it would be good, maybe not for them, they maybe don't have to be part of the group, but I think at some point they need to, you know, we need to be able to talk to them direct.
Be involved somewhere.
She's got a hand up.
Oh, sorry, who was that who had the hand up?
Lindsay.
Lindsay?
Sorry, Chair, I know you're about to speak. I just wanted to offer some advice on this element, if
Please
that's
do.
helpful.
Yes, thank you.
I think it's important to make sure that if you've got the ability to co-opt or invite anybody in and get external views, there may be other groups in addition to Women's Aid, and at this moment around the table you don't know who they may be that might be appropriate. The other thing is that you don't know what the scope of the group is yet, and I think it's very important to align any views that you seek to the scope of the group. So it might be pertinent to say that you would be open to co-opting somebody on, but that you leave that decision to the working group to determine once the scope has been fleshed out and the timetabling.
I think that sounds reasonable if people have it. Councillor Wright?
You said that if we agree, it doesn't have to be the next thing on the agenda to be done, but is there any reason why it can't be the next thing? Because looking at the work, we're looking at the things that we've got to look at. I can't say anything more important than this.
Absolutely not. That's for the work plan discussion at the end, and we may agree to do it then. It's just to not prejudice ourselves against this with this in mind when we've got a few other items which are just coming in then. So rather than decide and go straight into saying, yes, we'll do this as the next, to give it the other items which are on there as well a fair bite of the cherry. So with regards to the scope, we've had some suggestions from Tracy's presentation, which I've got, is scrutiny of the evidence behind it, scrutiny of the engagement, scrutiny of the development. A couple of things which were mentioned was the independent experts getting the policy right, examination of the demand, and working with other local authorities, which I think was alluded to as well by Tracy, that we've looked at that. So is there any consensus on what we'd like to do, or has anyone got a particular area which they feel we can bring the most amount of benefit to this with the Councillor Northover?
I don't know if it'd be covered in those things you just read out, but I'm just understanding the role of, I've forgotten what they're called now, where you have a house that people go to, a refuge. Specifically, and understanding what role refugees are going to have in the future for our area, and what they should look like, and the idea, should there be one in Bournemouth and one in Poole as we had before, just really properly understanding all of that within the framework of legislation and everything, and the guidance.
Thank you. Any other suggestions from the committee?
I'd like to know what level of support is being given now to what was being given when they were in the refuge before. This comes from slightly personal. When I was a firefighter, we used to go there quite a lot. They used to burn the toast. The alarms were always going off. And you would see a group of women with similar experiences supporting each other. Very much, there's kids running around tearing up the place, and you very much saw that the women were supporting each other. And I don't think that can be overlooked, and I don't think that will be replaced by a social worker popping in once a week. So I'd like to look at that support that is happening now to what was happening before. Okay.
Okay, and can I add to that as well, the intended support that will be once the new policy is in place as well? So past, present and future. Yeah, okay, I can get that. Any other suggestions? Careful if you scratch your head. I mean, I'll go straight to you.
Obviously, one of the things with this is that there was no consultation. It doesn't matter that it was the women's refuge. There seemed to have been, this was done without going to the members at all in any way. And that needs to be looked at as well. I know we don't go through every decision down the tree of hierarchy, but this seemed like quite a big decision to not come anywhere near the members.
I I do agree with that. However, just within the ask which we've had from full council, it's to oversee the finalisation of the Safe Accommodation Commission strategy rather than to look at previous decisions and the way made. That might be a separate topic for something that the Overview and Scrutiny Board might like to pick up at some point rather than in this piece of work. Please.
But does not looking at that help with future decisions so that it doesn't happen again?
Yeah. I think it can be taken into account. Councillor Duncan. Lindsay.
Sorry, just on that particular point about the any decisions being shared with members and consultation, I think looking specifically at that element of it is probably a role for audit and governance rather than scrutiny.
Thanks for that advice. It may be that the working group might want to give a recommendation to audit and governance to look at it following the piece of work. Okay, so I've got as the potential scope for this, looking at the levels of support which are being offered previously, currently, and within the new strategy, as well as the roles of refuges and what they look like in a modern society where we are now. And I would like to look at the engagement side of it as well. I think that's important. I don't want to make this too wide. I'd like to keep it fairly focused, but I think three potential topics. Does that seem reasonable for a group to do some work on it within a couple of months? Okay, so what I'm minded to do, if no one else has got anything to add at the moment, with what we've discussed, is to propose that we establish a working group to delegate to the working group itself to agree its lead member. I know Councillor Canavan has offered that, but I think that would be voted for within the group. Might be a better way to do it if everyone's happy with that. The scope to be, as we've just agreed there, so looking at the levels of support, the roles of refuge and the level of engagement, and that the membership is appointed via group leaders. So we have a true cross-party working group of, let's try and keep it fairly concise, of say 5 members. Does that seem a reasonable size? That's a good question, isn't it? How many groups are there? More than 5. But I think that gives 5, 6, 7. 7 would be the maximum. If we say a maximum of 7 members, and it may be that some of those seats aren't filled. Councillor Farr.
I'll just ask a quick question. I've just popped into my mind. Is it more important to have people who are most keen to be on the group than people who are from a particular political group? Because there might be, for instance, I think there was 2 members in the Green group who sounded quite keen. I think Councillor Mrs. Salmon and sorry, it's got Sarah Armstrong. I think they were 2 that were keen. So is it more important to have that people who are sort of passionate about the topic over than, you know, say it might be like 2 Greens or 2 Conservative rather than? Sorry, just want to throw that in there.
No, it's a good question. I see Lindsay's put her hand up. Could you give a bit of clarity around the group structure, please, Lindsay?
Yeah, it's really within the scrutiny members' gift to decide how they want to structure such a group. But perhaps when you write out to group leaders, you impress that the importance of someone coming forward with time and passion to be involved in the group, so that hopefully the volunteers you have are really keen to be on there. In terms of membership, I would just say that maybe 7 members might be a little bit too much for the group to be really targeted in its work, but we'd normally say 3 to 5 members on a working group is quite effective, but that can be delegated to you as chair to determine final membership if that's how the committee wants to proceed. And I was just going to ask, in terms of writing out to invite membership, in addition to writing to group leads, would you be minded to also encourage representation from other scrutiny committees so that it is a joint sort of piece of work? And the reason I raise that is because a large part of this work also spans across the Overview and Scrutiny Board, so the domestic violence policy sits under their remit, and this piece of work would be looking much more at the delivery and the housing element of that. But there's obviously crossover, and as Councillor Canavan said, there's implications on health. So perhaps when you invite membership, you could just encourage people from those committees to also consider coming forward.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, just on the size, I was going to say that when we were in the little groups and there was 3 of us, it was already quite difficult to find a time with the directors. And there is a bit of an urgency with this one as well. So I'm happy to go with a slightly smaller number of 3 to 5. And personally, I'm also happy for it to be members with a particular interest as opposed to politically balanced.
Okay. What I don't want to do, and I appreciate what you say about getting people who are interested. I think we have enough people interested in this across the political spectrum and independent to get good people who are working from each group. And what I don't want to do is end up in a position where I'm having group leaders come to me, well, there's 2 Greens on this. Why is there only 1 Labour or 1 Conservative? I'd rather have maximum 1 member from each group or independents. And I think 5 really enthusiastic people who want to be a part of this, and yeah, ideally with some scrutiny experience, possibly sitting on either a board or another scrutiny committee as well, so we get people who are already used to doing this sort of work. Does that sound fairly reasonable to everyone? I know I'm trying to make something quite unwieldy here, but it's a really important topic, and I want to make sure that we get it right and we get a good piece of work out of it rather than try and be too balanced across everything. So does that sound okay? Yes, Councillor Dawkins.
I think we shouldn't go politically balanced. I would find it pretty abhorrent if anybody for political gain was anti such a thing. I mean, it would just seem totally inappropriate, wouldn't it? On a subject like this, we ought to be able to completely unify behind a wanting to get this right, and bury anything politically would be my view.
I'd like to be able to do the same, but let's see. If we get a couple of people from one group who are very, very enthusiastic and show, then I'm not going to say no if we're not getting any interest from elsewhere. Lindsay.
Thanks. I just wanted to be really clear that the request from council was that it is cross-party, and that's different from politically balanced. And I don't think that's the suggestion there at all. And I think your suggestion, Chair, about aiming for around 5 people, but having them all from different groups, you know, wherever possible, is a really good practical way to go forward.
Thank you. Okay, so if we stick with that, 5 members, if I will write to group leaders asking them to nominate members who are enthusiastic, ideally sit on one or another of the different overview and scrutiny committees. I've already had a few expressions of interest already as well, which we'll take into account. The group will agree its own lead member, and the scope will be the 3 items as we discussed. Can I take that by consensus? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. That's really good. I'm really, really happy we got someone with that. And thanks to Councillor Farr and Councillor Canavan for bringing that to us as well. And thank you very much, Tracy, for the clarity. Councillor Matt.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? Is it solely in your gift to decide the 5 members? Is that right?
Yes. Would you prefer that not to be?
Oh, no, I was just curious. Yeah, sorry, I just missed that because obviously we're setting that out as cross-party working group, and I just wanted to be clear. If obviously 76 councillors came forward or expressed an interest, how we would actually. But if that's your headache, then it's fine.
Can I just say, please don't? However much I try and encourage as many people to get involved in what we do as possible, 76 might be a few too many for me to narrow down. Lindsay.
Yeah, again, just on that point, I think just in terms of practicalities, if you had another meeting next month, then that could be brought back and determined there. But in the absence of one until February and with the timeline for the work, I think if the committee is happy to support that, that's probably the most practical way to determine the membership so that the group can just crack on with its work.
Yeah, if everyone, Councillor Rice.
I was just going to say, in past experience, usually somebody will put their name forward to the group leader, and if there's more than two, then they will decide within that group who's the priority, and then the two names can be put forwards, but if there's space. But so it's sort of worked out that way, and so you'll end up with not that many names.
I hope so. And I'll also run it by my vice chair as well to make sure that we have some sort of consensus if we do end up with a large number to try and narrow it down a little bit. Okay, is everyone happy to move on to the next item? Great. Okay, so item number 7 is nutrient neutrality, which is more difficult to say than you'd think. So Wendy is here to introduce the report for us.
Thank you very much. So I'm Wendy Lane. I am the Director for Planning and Transport, and I'm here on my own because the leader, who is our portfolio holder, is not available at the moment. But she would be taking this with me because both it is a planning issue in the round because it has strategic planning and also development management aspects, and obviously, so therefore entirely within her portfolio. So we've been asked to give an update on where we are. This is primarily focused on the River area of conservation, and that's because this is the area that has been changing on the approach that's being taken. Poole Harbour is also an area which has been identified as having unfavourable condition. It's a very protected habitat. It's protected under the habitats regulations, but there's been an arrangement already in place for Poole Harbour for a while. As the paper sets out, the impact on the River Avon Special Area of Conservation is much more recent, and there's been a lot of changes that have been coming through. So the report tries to summarise where we got to. There is even more information that I could have included, including legislative changes that happened as a result of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill that clearly had an expectation that the key requirement to deal with nutrient neutrality was going to be put on the wastewater treatment works in the area, because as the report highlights, the area that we can most closely control isn't on the agricultural side as a result of the setup that's been put in place by Natural England. It is what comes through wastewater treatment works, and therefore that was where they put the requirement. The issue we had was that whilst they identified kind of catchment sensitive areas in January 2024, they said that there would potentially be exemptions. So we didn't know exactly where we were, i.e. would Christchurch wastewater treatment work be covered by an exemption or not? That was meant to be in April. That actually was delayed till May. But then we got that clarity that there was an expectation that the wastewater treatment works would deal with the mitigation on the phosphates by 2030, and therefore all we were having to come up with was an interim position between now and 2030 to deal with those phosphates. And so what we've been doing is working hard with a range of credit providers in the area to ensure that we can put forward a proposal for that to have neutrality, i.e. no negative impact as a result of development adding net additions or more housing units, and therefore more effluent creation, which if not dealt with correctly would have an impact. So there is the nutrient calculator in place now. There are nutrient providers, and therefore this is the update that we have provided to you. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I will open this item for debate. All we're being asked to do at this stage is note this paper, I believe, but I'll open it for questions. I think it's something which has been on the fringes of our agenda for quite a while now, so it's good to get an update on this. And Councillor Rice.
Hello. Yeah, would you be able to give an example of some local providers and what type of thing they do?
Yeah, so the issue that you've got is that you have to, so the condition is already unfavourable, and that means no more pollution can be put into the water than is currently there. So the option that's been identified is that you have to take out an existing polluter and ensure that that kind of headroom that you are then taking out to make sure you're no worse than you are currently. That's the option that we've got available to us at the moment. So there are currently 2 fish farms, which are then having that there's an arrangement to then buy credits off them, and then they are no longer going to be polluting. And so that there is that certainty, as I say, in this interim position up to 2030.
Can you expand a little bit? And I know it might be a little bit outside of your scope. By what does it mean by they are no longer polluting? Does that mean they will no longer be doing a certain part of their business, or they'll not be using they'll be using a different waste disposal, or what does it look like in reality?
Again, this isn't my area of expertise in relation to exactly what is being done. My understanding is that one fish farm is going completely. Another fish farm is fundamentally changing their practices, including the nature of the product that they're producing, and that therefore is giving them the headroom that they then can sell the credits around the lack of pollution that they're currently. So therefore they are being able to prove that they're not polluting to the extent that they were, and therefore those credits are available.
Okay, thank you. That makes some sense. I'm not very aware of what it is. So that's why I just wanted to get a bit more of an understanding exactly what it looks like. Yes, Councillor Wright.
Did you say that includes housing as well, building of new houses?
So the key areas that produce pollution, as I say, are agriculture, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly difficult to deal with, and it's effluent. So what goes through a wastewater treatment works. So anything that adds more toilets inherently is a polluting source. So that's why the nutrient neutrality requirement and the need to meet nutrient credits relates to anything that delivers net additions. So that's more housing or tourism units that equally were producing more effluent.
Yes.
On the general terms, are the MMO and inland fisheries contributing to this, or do they give you feedback about pollution in, I mean, like with the oyster beds, or in Poole Harbour, I'm specifically thinking about?
So my understanding is that inherently those areas, the special areas of conservation, special protection areas, are actively monitored by Natural England, and part of their monitoring processes would obviously involve those kind of key sources. It's them very much then have determined and produced the nutrient calculators, which advise how much credits you need to buy, particularly for your uses. So the problem that we've had, and I say this report does focus primarily on Christchurch, is the fact that the River Avon obviously is a catchment that goes through multiple areas, of which Christchurch is at the end.
Hi, Tom.
And
it's Patrick
therefore,
just trying to ring you back.
Sorry, and therefore pollution that comes upstream, by the time it gets down to Christchurch, obviously the levels are a lot higher. So then inherently that's what's been part of the reason why there might have been nutrient solutions higher up the catchment, but they've been much less lower down. So yeah, it's very much monitored as a result of monitoring by Natural England to determine that. But as I say, I'm sure that in those key locations such as Poole Harbour, all of those interested bodies would be involved.
Does that answer your question, Councillor Goddard?
Yeah, it's just that I sit on the Inland Fisheries Authority, and I was just curious about that. So I'm going to get back to them and see if they have got any further comments on that. Thank you.
Thank you. What I know this is a bit of a reaching question. So with these credits, which we will be getting for Christchurch, what does that look like in practicality with the development of the housing targets which are in the local plan? Because as you said, this is until 2030 we'll need the credits for, until there's an additional wastewater treatment or whatever that might look like. So where does that leave developments in Christchurch from today until 2030? Are we going to be able to meet the house building targets which we're setting for ourselves in the local plan?
really difficult. It's a really difficult question to answer. So we clearly have had an issue with delivering current targets in the existing legacy local plans. Actually, Christchurch has actually been one of the areas that has been delivering at its target. So it's been around the 90% level, but obviously as a result of all those targets going together and the approach that we are now got plans that are more than 5 years out of date, we've only got a 1.6 land supply of housing, which means we have, on the tilted balance, have to treat applications for housing incredibly favourably. That's what the policy requirement is. So we're already at that situation at the moment. The issue is that nutrient neutrality comes above that on the policy terminology because it is nationally important requirement to mitigate something that is so important. Special area of conservation is no different to something like Stonehenge. It's just nutrients rather than heritage, but the importance of it is fundamentally at that level. So that's why we've been working quite hard with those credit providers to try and ensure that there is something coming forward. The problem it is going to have is that that's a cost to them. They have to then buy those credits, and obviously with the kind of challenging economic situation there's been with cost inflation for construction, that's an added cost. So we are obviously going to be going through the local plan examination process early next year. I am sure that developers will be querying whether or not, as a result of things like nutrient neutrality, but as I say, now that we feel they're in that positive position, actually there's been a lot that's kind of ready to go. We are hopeful that isn't going to be that fundamental constraint moving forward, but those credits are available now for those developers to buy, and they will only have to buy them for 5 years, because by 2030, the wastewater treatment works themselves have to ensure that they've got the technological advancements that mean they're not putting the phosphates out. So it doesn't matter if people are flushing as many toilets as they like. The nature of the technical advancements in those wastewater treatment works are meaning they're at a nutrient level from the effluent that's coming out of them. As I say, I know it's quite a complicated explanation to give, and I can't really answer that at the moment.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you. That's all right.
Is there, you say 2030, obviously that means that all the sewage plants are having work done to put machinery in. Well, could this happen in certain places sooner? And would that be taken into account for house building, for example?
So the nutrient calculator does take into account as I say, that monitoring on the ground of what's coming forward, as in when they're monitoring at the moment, there's a really high level of phosphate that they've got to deal with because of that coming downstream. Obviously, the more that's done upstream, the quicker the wastewater treatment works improvements are coming, the quicker that when they put in the calculator will give much less level of credit purchase, and therefore they won't have that overhead on them in relation to their costs, etc. But as I say, it isn't a predict and provide. It isn't we assume it will be by X. The wastewater treatment companies have to do it by 2030, and Natural England needs to know that when they do their monitoring, that the phosphate levels are the actual ones that they're monitoring on the ground. They can't assume a trajectory that it will be done by that. So it is proof. They have to see proof of that water is improving. So if it's done quicker, we'll see the proof coming through from the statistics on the monitoring.
And then at that point, developers wouldn't have to get the credits.
So because they actively monitor all the time, we have been told fairly recently that there isn't a need to mitigate phosphates at Poole Harbour, for example. That's as a result of that ongoing monitoring that's now proven that isn't needed. It's still needed for nitrates for Poole Harbour, but it isn't needed for phosphates. So again, yes, the moment it's physically done and those improvements are seen, Natural England will advise that they are confident that the SACs are not being negatively impacted, i.e. becoming more unfavourable.
Can I just ask, broadly speaking, you might not know the answer, but do we know how many more toilets we can have when we lose a fish farm? Do you know what I mean? In other words, what scope does the loss of a fish farm give us in terms of being able to increase development? I
can't answer that, but we are confident that
because I say we've been working with Natural England and those suppliers, that gives us a reasonable bank in the area of credits that should facilitate that flow of trajectory of housing delivery up to 2030, because it's only got to give us that headroom to 2030.
Thank you for that. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, so in 2030, for pollution levels from, what I'm trying to get at is we're closing down, because fish farms closing in order to allow treatment works to continue polluting at the rate they are sort of per toilet to allow for more building to come in. So in 2030, what are we saying actually fundamentally happens with those treatment works?
So the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act, in October 23, it was explicit that it was mandatory for wastewater treatment companies to remove phosphorus in those wastewater treatment works where there were catchment sensitive areas by 2030. So there is a mandatory requirement in legislation for them to do that. So it's government legislation that's requiring it.
Councillor Martin, did you want to?
You know, just so for fish farms, obviously, I mean, I'm just wondering what's in it for them in terms of closing down. It's just their total output over time. It's just there's more money up front in these credits than there is in for them just to continue operations over an indefinite amount of time, or in 2030 can fish farms start up again?
So we've agreed legal agreements with them whereby we have because the pressure on the local authorities that we have to do something called appropriate assessment under the habitats regulation, and that says that we have certainty that by us permitting additional net additions, we are confident that they can be mitigated because those credits are being bought. So that Section 33 agreement that we're having with those key credit providers commits them to closing down their operations or closing down the polluting aspect of their operations for the length of the duration I think that we need them to, i.e. they can't then just bounce back up and do it again. So that's what's taken the time, is that we can't rely on someone saying they won't. You need to have that in a legal agreement that requires them to close down and then stop and not reinvigorate that again.
Thank you for that. I think at this point it's worth closing this item. I don't think we're going to have any recommendations from it unless we had recommendations which we could give further up the chains of government to say, can we sort out our waterways quicker so we can have clean rivers and seas, which it seems a shame that would you have to discuss this and trading off one type of pollution for another until we get to a point where we can actually deal with the waste that we're producing. But that is a far bigger discussion, I think, for possibly another future meeting with different stakeholders. So, Wendy, thank you very much for introducing that to us. And I think, yeah, we can bring that to a close and move on to the next, which is, I think, probably the biggest one we've got today, which is the plan for play. It's the second time that we've seen this now, and it's much closer to development. So I welcome Councillor Sandra Moore to be on a different side of the table for a change. Welcome back to our committee. And yeah, if you'd like to introduce the paper, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I remember the first time that this was introduced, and yes, I was sitting over there. As councillors, we're probably all aware that BCP's play stock has been largely inherited from previous councils, that some play parks are in decline and obviously need investment. Legacy councils had very little future planning for when equipment reached end of life, and we do need to do something about that now. So Play Builder funding from a government grant was available and used to improve play parks back in 2009-10, but since then there's only been ad hoc interventions using developer contributions or other external funding for specific sites. Improvements have also been made using community labour, for example, painting fences and equipment, removing vegetation, etc. And I say that because I've done it all. So the aim now is to find a fair and sustainable way to fund play parks so they're accessible and appeal to a range of age groups and abilities. And everyone should have access to decent play facilities. However, given Council's budgets situation, we're also aware funding will be a challenge and needs to come from a variety of sources. So what we have here is a high-level strategy which can help prioritise funding, lays out a vision for what future play provision should look like across BCP, and can be applied in stages as funds become available. And at this stage, I just need to remind you that there's a plan for play briefing for all councillors next Wednesday, the 27th of November at 5 o'clock, which will talk about specific sites, which I know everybody wants to know about. And there will also be a paper going to Cabinet on Tuesday, the 10th of December. So now Martin and Rebecca are going to go run through the paper and some slides, and we would welcome your questions and comments after that. Okay.
Thanks very much, Andre. And then, yeah, over to you, Martin. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Moore. And yeah, we've been working closely with Councillor Moore and Councillor Hadley as joint portfolio holders on this, and I'm pleased to bring this back to you. And a perfect summary to sort of lead us into this. So as we've shared before, sorry, that should be on full screen. There we go. As we've shared before, we've got a range, we've got a large number of play facilities across BCP, 171 spaces, and that includes sort of our wheeled provision as well, so skate parks and BMX sites and that sort of thing. And as Councillor Moore has explained, a lot are in need of repair, refurbishment, or indeed full replacement. So we've got lots of assets, we've got a lot of defects that we've noted. So the annually done for us, as well as our own operations teams, what we're noting and what we're having to deal with in terms of sort of the health and safety and risk assessment of individual pieces is an increasing challenge. And since being here the last time we presented at ONS, we've done a lot of work in terms of site audits and a really robust evidence base in terms of understanding what we have, where it is, what it is, and its condition and life expectancy. And Rebecca's going to talk you through that in a bit of detail in a minute. And that really is on the back of also you would have all had, I'm sure, concerns or issues in your own wards about equipment being removed or indeed whole play areas being at risk of closure because of our inability to invest or use revenue funding to improve them. So what we've done is work to bring forward a strategic view rather than that ad hoc approach, to try and get a balanced view, to understand all the different metrics that are involved in play. So walk times, areas of deprivation, lifespan and positioning of play equipment, overall sort of site quality. So it's not just about the actual equipment and how it sits on a space, it's the access to it. Is there drop curbs near to the road to get to make it accessible? Is there shade? Is there cover? Where's the nearby toilet? So we've done a lot of work around whole site quality as well as individual equipment and the issues around those. And we've got three key parts to this strategic work. We're calling it the plan for play. So there's the overarching sort of strategic document that sets out the scope for the work, why it's important, so why play generally on a national context for health and well-being, for children and families, and everything we know and love about offering play opportunities, why that's important, and then getting into the detail of spatial provision and into that evidence base. And then accompanying that, we have a design guide. So this is very much about writing a document that sets out how we should be designing play spaces in the future, and that's the sort of the larger we, if you like. So that's us as a council, how we might deliver that, but it could also be used by developers or community groups or anybody else looking to have an interest in providing those facilities. And that design guide is kind of really robust. It goes into things that we've heard at this committee previously around age and inclusion for all ages and abilities, making space for girls in particular and teenage girls, as well as all of those lots of different range of facets in terms of what makes successful play spaces. So that design guide is kind of a really key document amongst that. And then we have a play improvement plan, and this is kind of the real detail behind how we would look to seek to prioritise any investment that we can seek, and how we would do that as we go through. We're not sharing that in detail with you today, as we're going through kind of steps through council process to get to hopefully try and get successfully to cabinet in a few weeks' time. But as Councillor Moore said, there is an opportunity for all members to listen in and have a look at that next week. And then alongside that is the evidence base and appendices and mapping and all the other work that goes with it. And also just worth flagging that we've been working cross-service on this with those teams that you can see on the screen, trying to make this as wide and as broad and as sort of cohesive as possible. So within the strategy document, that plan for play, we set out sort of 5 key priorities, and there's kind of subsections within these, all around everything hopefully you would expect to see in a play strategy around creating high quality but sustainable play provision, so robust, trying to minimise future maintenance, trying to get the play areas in the right place where it can reach most people. Having future strategic vision around that, embedding the design guide, so we're designing quality spaces. The funding piece is key, so there's priorities in there about short and long-term funding to try and deliver. And then really important throughout all of this work is enabling communities. So we already deliver new play facilities really closely with stakeholders and partner organisations. And so this piece of work kind of gives us a platform to maybe reach further, maybe reach different audiences beyond our, maybe our charitable partners. There might be a role here for corporates and business and other local interested people. So broadening the reach and therefore then potentially the funding opportunities within those partners as well. And we know that this is important. So BCP wide surveys, not specific to play, where sort of play is often the second most important thing to our residents behind sort of bins and refuse collections. And many people say they use their local spaces at least once a week. And obviously, there's everything around how important these spaces are for all our children's development and communities generally. Rebecca's going to talk us through the evidence base, if that's right.
So over the last couple of years, we've been building a really strong, like Martin said, robust evidence base. Initially, we started with bringing the 3 legacy pieces of data together as they set separately, so that we inform that information, and we looked at our annual inspection data. So that's our third-party annual inspection that's completed by the play inspection company, alongside our maintenance inspections that is completed by our in-house teams. We completed an asset review back in summer of 23. Colleagues within Green Space Development and our ops teams went out and filled in some audit forms around kind of our design and usability and the play value our sites offer, the safety, the community links and the levels of inclusivity as well. We've drawn in all our spatial data analysis, looking at walk times, indices of deprivation and location of our play spaces. And all that data has enabled us to give each site, each play space, an overall score. And that's enabled us to rank and prioritise our recommendations going forward, looking at a kind of a 5-phase approach. And all that data has helped us build our improvement plan. Okay, and we also, alongside this piece of work, looked at some indicative costs. So each play space has been given names, so doorstep play, local play, neighbourhood play and destination play, and that's very much based on the size and the offer of each of those play spaces. And then we've costed out kind of the replacement, the disposal or refurbishment of each of those sites, and that's again gone into our improvement plan. our recommendations for this 5-phased approach is looking at having 2 new play spaces, completing 75 full site defect repairs, 44 play space refurbishments, 20 play space full replacements, and 32 repurposes. And those repurposes may be a small play offering that only has one piece of play equipment, or a site that may be coming to end of life, but also we're improving an offer within that locality as well. Okay, and then looking at some of the costings around what the improvement plan is going to be advising cost wise. Do you want me to go through those costings? Or
yeah, that's very what. Yeah, I can. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so yeah, the 2 new play spaces based on those typologies we said about the local play, the neighbourhood play, the destination play, dependent on those sizes of sites, gives us a total cost of just over 10 million for all that work over that 5-phased approach. And sitting outside of that and needs to be included is the resourcing, our staff resourcing to help enable this piece of work to happen.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. And so obviously key to this discussion then is how do we fund 10-11 million pounds worth of a programme, which obviously is a significant investment and sort of ask in terms of the funding. So what we're bringing forward, so obviously this piece of work is accompanying the cabinet report, and sort of the draft version of that accompanied this committee on the agenda. So what we're putting forward is a first phase of work to start from April 25, if recommended and sort of and approved at cabinet. And that first phase is around sort of 3.9 million pounds worth of work. We've identified about £500,000 worth of ring fence funds that are already available that can sort of be pulled into this. Those are mainly from legacy Section 106 or planning obligation contributions, and sat in a variety of different funds and reserves. And we're working with finance colleagues at the moment to just kind of sense check those and make sure we can bring all of those forward. But they should deliver that level of support. The remaining ask is therefore a strategic SIL. That is obviously a piece of work that's ongoing with planning colleagues at the moment, leading that in terms of how we prioritise future use of strategic SIL. And obviously those funds are in themselves limited, and obviously any funding that is brought forward for play is therefore and obviously not available for anything else. And there's well aware that there's significant ask across all services in terms of infrastructure needs and future investment. So what we've tried to build is what we think is kind of the immediate ask in terms of trying to mitigate those defect repairs immediately. So that stops further decline of play equipment. So it means we can get in and replace the swing chains, the swing seats, the consumable parts that, due to the spending controls that we currently have, the revenue, the sort of fairly small revenue budget of £150,000 a year that we currently have in park operations, we can't currently spend that because of the spending controls. So we're not able to arrest any decline in even quite small deficiencies or defects in play areas. So this what we're trying to set out is let's pick those up and stop that decline by addressing those defect repairs, and then also start on the sites that need it most and in the areas that need it most, based on what Rebecca's told you in terms of that scoring and that matrix for how we've assessed the sites. We then make the interventions where they're most going to have biggest value for the communities that need them most. And that's what we're setting out within the strategic documents and within the cabinet report as well. So, and then alongside that, it brings back in the point I made a moment ago about community partners, and actually today I've had another community partner come forward to say actually they've identified some funding that might be able to help support. And again, we've got many examples where we've done that with partners. So we'll continue to work positively on that front as well. But I think it's worth acknowledging that makes a difference, but it's a relatively small difference in the wider, the much bigger financial ask here. And then final slide on timing. So we've been plugging away at this. The last time we came to ONS here was quite some time ago, I think last year at some point. So this has taken a long time to bring forward. It's a detailed piece of work. We've recently we've presented an informal cabinet briefing. We've been to corporate management board. And next week we got that all councillor briefing before we go to cabinet and full council. So if adopted and successful, we'd look to kind of mobilise and kind of gear this up first few months of next year, starting in earnest April 25. We've got support from communications and the team for consultation, who are kind of readying and thinking about already what the public consultation on this would look like, and that's a significant level of detail around decision making around future design and options on different sites as well. So I hope that helps provide a decent sort of summary and overview of where we've got to with this work, and welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, everyone. That was really detailed, and I'm really happy to see this back and see that some of the ideas which have come in from this committee have been brought into what you're looking at doing. And just to use my chair's prerogative and ask the first question, if I may. Looking at the timeline, let's park the idea that we're not quite sure where the funding's going to come from and all of that for the time being. What does the timeline look like after April 25 when this commences? What are we looking for the 105 sites targeted in for improvement? What's the timescale of that? Is it a couple of years, longer, shorter? What are we doing? And then when does everything at the other two phases start coming in?
Thank you. Yeah, and so that first phase we'd like to deliver in a year if we can. I think that might be a level of ambition in that. So like I said, the defect repairs, we would like to be able to sort of fly out as quickly as possible. So that mobilisation time of the first 3 months of next year, we've already had conversations with procurement around setting up a specific framework and contract for this. So we would quite early on in sort of through to spring, we'd have suppliers on board who can then deliver at pace on this. So we would be targeting those defect repairs. We would then look to run sort of parallel work streams. So where we've got a new site, a whole new play site, that's going to need a lot of consultation and public engagement on. We want to take people with us on that. That's going to take some time to deliver. There will likely be some quick win sites where we know we are able to get in and do sort of some fairly straightforward refurbishments, and so those we can parallel out. And so probably outside of the defect repairs that we can hopefully pick up quite quickly, the first refurbishments I'd like to think would be on site and delivering by sort of autumn 25. So that's kind of a 6-month lead in and window to try and get suppliers on board, procurement, finance, and then push at getting stuff on the ground. I think full site replacements would need a bit more design consideration, more consultation and engagement, and so therefore going to take a slightly longer timeline as with that new site. So I think what we'd seek to do, if successful, is build all of that as a package of work early next year to then be able to start publishing that, get it live on the website alongside the timelines for different consultation phases, and then it starts to kind of stream out from there.
Cool, thank you. That sounds very exciting.
Can I just add to that? So
yeah, please do.
There's an opportunity with the refurbishments to be able to lot as well. So you can have 4 or 5 refurbishments lotted out through procurement to one supplier. So that really quickens that process up to be able to get into the ground and getting sites kind of built as well.
Nice. So it could all happen very quickly and snowball from once we get started, which will hopefully save everyone going my park first, please. Councillor Martin first, I think, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just wondering why the evidence base, is that complete? Because we haven't obviously seen that. I'm just sort of concerned as scrutiny, what's going to happen is next week we'll go to the councillor brief and we'll get the information. There'll suddenly be uproar, obviously, from the sites which are identified as having to be repurposed. And we all agreed, I mean, well, I assume we all agree. We all agreed last time when it came forward that this is all a good idea, and I don't think there's anything inside the strategy anyone that I would disagree with. I'm just sort of concerned on that detail. But no, I'm saying tonight, yeah, this is a great idea, and then in a week's time, I'm sort of people question like what's in that. How have you come to this decision in this matrix? Have you made some decisions where the something maybe scored slightly lower, but there's been, I don't know, some other considerations which are not quantifiable, and therefore, you know, is there potential that will be a little bit of blowback here because we'll be saying, oh, we've missed out a whole chunk of this where we didn't have a good look at it.
Martin?
Yeah, and fair comment, and I think that's reasonable, and I think we're guided by sort of the sensitivities around this, I suppose, in terms of how to manage. Yeah, that this is a strategic piece of work, and I've been very careful, and some of you have probably asked me about when we're doing different things in your ward, and I've been saying you got to wait for the strategy, and I appreciate the patience on that, and I think guided by the need to take this and get this approved by sort of Cabinet and CMB before we start releasing the detail. And there's an Echo article today on the back of what's been released from today's agenda and stuff. So we're very mindful that publicly this is really sensitive in terms of impact on local spaces. So we're sort of guided by that, and I appreciate the difficulty. So the plan is to take this to Cabinet and CMB on Monday afternoon, and then my action coming straight after that is to then send all members the detail, so you have sight of that before we then meet on Wednesday. So you all have time to review and digest before we then meet, rather than us trying to detail 171 play sites to you in an hour and a half or whatever it is. So we'll come to you in advance. The evidence base and what we tried to describe tonight would also come with that. So you'd be able to see sort of the different those metrics and that data set in terms of how we've come to that scoring and priorities. I've no doubt that will get argued over and we'll get challenged on that, and I'm quite comfortable with that. I think we've been in this long enough to know that, or feel that this is a really robust piece of work. But no doubt there will be different views within it. We'll come back to that same point of we've currently got 171 play sites. That isn't sustainable in the future for our financially in how we manage them. £151,000 a year to try and manage that number of sites just isn't practical going forward. And we know that how tight the finances are. So there's a mixture of things in all of that is dictate how we've brought this forward. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Kate, but I think that's hopefully, I mean, does that kind of answer the question, and hopefully that.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Thank you. I don't think I've made this up. I think I did read this somewhere, but I can't quite find it right now. About just brief mention about the CGR, and I'm just wondering if that. So obviously the database is set as such. So if someone sort of turned around and was losing the play park, and they thought, oh, hang on a minute, we'll create a parish council and we'll set a massive preset in order to save our space. I mean, I know there's a big what if, but just along those sort of lines, is that still, over that work program that you detailed earlier, is there still scope for that to come in from that? I know you've mentioned other partners, but that could well be a catalyst for people thinking about how that feeds into those sort of other consultations.
And there's a few things. There's obviously the governance review. There's obviously the SEAL prioritisation. So we're pushing it. There's different timelines involved in all of this. I think broadly the answer is yes to your question. So what we're trying to do, and then where we've got difficult decisions about some sites and where there's a need to kind of repurpose those and look at where the spatial provision is to reduce our overall number of sites. Quite a lot of those are individual pieces of equipment. So there's kind of, it might be a BMX ramp or a skate grind rail. And in one green space, there's just a boat, a timber boat, which is about as big as this desk. Generally, those types of things that we're suggesting we remove because they're at the end of life and they offer very little play value. I genuinely don't think many, if anybody, will actually notice. So those I think are fairly straightforward, hopefully. There are undoubtedly some decisions and some spaces and clusters of spaces, and this is where the consultation's key. And those are, what we want to try and set out is that we do need to reduce the number of play facilities we've got, but in some spaces there will be some decisions to make. So for example, if we're reducing from 3 spaces to 2, well, let's have a conversation and a discussion with the community about if we build a big, shiny and really invest in a lot of money in a new space here, actually you're going to use that old one over there or both of those? Probably not. So in terms of walk times and how they're connected there to the community and other facilities, where is the right space for those? And then it comes into that whole green space sort of setting. So where do you most want to spend time? How do you access it? Is it on an active travel route? Is it near the cafe and the toilet? All of those sorts of discussions come in. So for those, I think we're trying to be clear that we need to reduce numbers, but let's have a discussion and that consultation about those spaces. And colleagues in consultation and the insights team have been very clear that where the council have a duty to consult where we're reducing or removing facilities. So that's what we want to set out and do. And with the cabinet paper, will come a load more detail. I appreciate, again, you haven't seen this yet. We'll come a load more detail on how we intend to do that around clusters of areas where that impact will be felt. And that's different across BCP. So we want to really be clear that we'll spend more time where there's a bigger impact. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think what you've said there, that's something really important I'd like to see in the consultation. I think you've alluded to it. What's the most important sort of place for you? Is it somewhere that's on the way home from school where you can just spend 20 minutes, or is it a destination? What is prioritised? And it sounds like you're going to cover that, so I really welcome seeing that in there. Councillor Northover.
When you were explaining earlier about the budget being 150,000, I think, but you couldn't spend it, I'd like to understand all about that, please.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I'm Kate Langdown, Director for Environment. It's in relation to the current spending controls that have been set as part of the budget setting process. So as much as everybody in this room would agree, play is very important to our residents. It's not a statutory service. And as such, our current spending restrictions relate to statutory services and to minimum standards within that. So maintaining play assets falls outside of that at this time.
Mm-hmm. And so why won't that apply next year?
It could do, but that's what this cabinet paper is seeking approval to change as part of adopting the strategy. Yeah.
So it's within our, it's up to us whether or not that restriction could apply or not. And it has been this year, has it?
But so the funding that we've talked about in terms of requesting a cabinet is capital funding, which is, so the 151 is revenue funding and controlled by that and governed by that spending, those spending controls, whereas what we're seeking is capital funding that doesn't have that restriction.
But how we maintain them going forward comes back to that revenue question that will have to be picked up.
I just had another question, if that's right. It just seems recently like it's been so sudden that all the play equipment, it's just suddenly, we're getting calls saying it's disappeared, and it seems like it was fine, and then suddenly it's not, but nothing seems to have changed from the sort of parents going and visiting the parks perspective, So what has changed that has made something that was fine suddenly not fine?
So the last capital funding that play received across Bournemouth and Poole was back in 2009, 2010. That was central government funding called Play Builder. An average play area has a life expectancy of 10 to 15 years, dependent on its usage. So we're coming to the end of that Play Builder period and that life expectancy. So the majority of Play Builder play areas are now reaching end of life, and that's why you're seeing a surge in the number of sites that are having pieces of equipment removed, or whole play sites coming to end of life all at the same time. Christchurch received some funding back in 2019, 2018, and that was 1.2 million. And they've gone through this piece of work where they decommissioned a number of, or repurposed a number of sites and replaced and refurbished the rest. So the majority of Christchurch play areas have got a longer life expectancy because that funding, that capital funding they received later.
So, but we are looking at each piece. We're not just going, this is a certain age. We're not deciding it's not suitable anymore because of its age. We are actually finding physical.
It's condition.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
That answered everything, Councillor Northover? Cool. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, Lisa, if you can move towards Chris. I'll go over and I'll go over this way. Hello. Yes, just on the consolidation of the 32 sites. Yeah, it would just be great to ensure that ward councillors, of any that you sort of think ward councillors need to know about, that they are contacted rather than it's assumed that they've maybe know about it. And also as part of that, like the Parks Foundation talk was really interesting. And so it would be really helpful to also think about really simple advice to give to councillors if residents are getting upset, to empower councillors to empower the residents to then take charge of their play area, so that residents aren't just getting frustrated, but they're actually being given an option. If you really care about this, then we need to think together as a community about how to protect it. I emailed about this earlier. Play streets. I can't see anything in the information that we've been given. I was just wondering whether there's anything in the more detailed paper, but for me, it fits into a few of those top 5 strategic aspects that you raised.
Martin, play streets.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Going reverse order. So play streets is so those 5 priorities I listed out there are sort of sub bits within each of those, and they're a reasonable number. Play streets is in those, so the active travel team, cycling walking team have been involved in kind of that section and sort of it's a mention in the priorities. It's as we've taken this forward, as this conversation reveals, we've very much focused on how do we address the infrastructure needs of what we've got, as well as trying to set that strategic vision for the future. And that's where the play streets bits comes in terms of that strategy in the future. The same as there's reference in there to kind of providing like an off-road BMX sort of dirt track type provision, because we haven't got anything like that in BCP either. So there's a number of things like that. They're not huge parts of the strategy document, which is where they sit, but they are in there. So when we're looking for future funding or future opportunities, there will be a point of reference and say, well, it's in the strategy as a priority. And we've been trying to build those. So yeah, that's definitely in there. And and also the design guide talks about doorstep play and play on the way, which is also where that sits in. So it's a strong element within the design guide as well. So I'm hoping you'll be happy with the content we've got in there on those.
The terminology play streets is definitely there. Yeah. Lovely.
Yeah. And then the other one about empowering communities, if I pick that up as well, what we'd like to do, so again, a bit that early next year mobilisation period, is about getting the FAQs right, about getting the case studies evidence. So where we work with, for example, Rebecca worked with Broadstone Neighbourhood Forum last year to deliver a new play in Broadstone Rec. We've done stuff with Poole Communities Trust. We've got other sites where we've delivered with partners before. So we can do case studies, we can build kind of that sorry, excuse me, that sort of how-to guide that hopefully does what you've suggested there. And we can open that out and share that with you and hopefully get that so it's usable for yourselves in directing people to that. And obviously there is going to be a case here of, I've already said we've got a reasonably ambitious scale of delivery in that year 1. We want to make this impactful, but there is a resource requirement on that. And obviously we're not going to be able to get to all 170 play areas straight away, or be able to take every bit of sort of community support and grab it. But again, we've been talking to the community's team in terms of their sort of area and sort of locality bases, and just trying to make this as robust as possible. So it's not wider than our teams, as well as the sort of the leisure teams in terms of skate and wheeled as well. So trying to share this, but obviously everybody's got limited capacity. But we want to try and set those guides up so that we get that right from the off. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to follow on to that as well, Councillor Rice?
Yeah. If that's okay. Just a brief thing on the consolidation of the play parks. It's been raised a couple of times, but it is the main thing that stands out to me. But once you'd explained it, it didn't sound quite so concerning. So maybe some images and really working on that communication around that aspect would be really key.
We've got sat alongside the strategy, we have an appendices that gives out a brief of each of the sites we're recommending for repurpose, like a catalogue with a photo and the explanation and reasoning on why. So that's all sat within the strategy as well.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, this might be similar to what Councillor Rice was saying. Your example with the 3 play parks being changed to 2, and the one that goes, would that always stay as like a green space? We're only talking about equipment. It's not like it's going to be suddenly sold off a building. Well, you know.
Yeah, no, it's really, yeah, it's the next question, isn't it? And yeah, absolutely right. So again, that document that Rebecca, and I appreciate this is frustrating because we're not in a ability to share this with you yet. So we split those down by type. So we've got 32 spaces where we have to make, we're suggesting we make those decisions. And of those, thank you. So we've got 13 sites where we're suggesting removing equipment and then retaining it as green space. So that might be removing the equipment, and if it's got a fence. We've built in a small bit of budget to then say, is there something we then do with that space? Put a bench in, maybe put some ground markings on. Is it a scooter trail with some white lining? Is it that type of really kind of subtle, or is it some tree planting or something along those sort of improvements? We've then got some spaces where we think we should consider future use. So whether they're kind of tiny little provisions in amongst a garage block or the back end of a housing estate where there isn't the footfall or necessarily supervised and overseen, those types of spaces we want to consider future use, but only the other side of public consultation, full ward member and portfolio holder engagement, and then take those forward for decision making. So they're kind of on a list, but subject to everything I've just said. So we're not, my line earlier about the sort of the responsibility as a council to consult on change in provision and closure facilities, that's definitely where they sit. And also that will then get balanced with the need for, if it is considered as a disposal of the site. And to be clear, we're not talking about green spaces that you'll have or play areas that you will have in your head. We're talking about really, really poor quality spaces tucked in the back of sort of dense areas that you probably won't even know are there. And in some cases, we had to go searching for them just because they were on a list. And again, I don't want to be too sort of flippant about them. They will be important to some people, I'm sure. But again, it's in that territory of if we significantly improve what's just around the corner or over the road or on the adjacent green space, they're not going to be missed. And actually, they're more often than not kind of just attractors for the antisocial behaviour. So how do we then genuinely have the conversation about how we use those spaces? So that's the piece of work that we want to do. And then there's a very small number of sites where we might look. Just need to check ownership. So obviously we're in discussion with the parish councils around taking on some of those and land transfer of those. So a couple of those are in play and those sorts of things as well. So on Monday you'll get that list with the photos and the breakdown and where we're considering those. So that will be laid out for you. Does that help? Yeah.
Are you okay with that? Cool. Councillor Goodall.
I just wanted to ask, are there going to be maps, Martin?
Always. Always a map. Yes. Lots of maps.
And yeah, Councillor Dalton-Gibson.
Yeah, a couple of bits and pieces. In fact, on page, I think 31, you do talk about disposal of open spaces, which is what led me to think you might be selling some. And I was just going to ask, if you do dispose of them, will the capital receipts be ring-fenced for the play area, or will they just get lost?
I think that's probably above my pay grade, and that's for council to determine, I would suggest.
I don't think that's been discussed yet.
I mean, when we're looking for capital receipts, it's an obvious claim, isn't it? That was it. I just wondered how, if I use the word, how widely, I hesitate to say joined up in the thinking. We had the presentation from the Parks Foundation the other day, and I noticed that the Redhill Park is turning in one of the profits from the cafe. But one of the reasons they probably turn in the profit from the cafe is that people are at the play area. And obviously, if I'm not suggesting you would, Redhill is probably one of the ones that you're definitely going to keep. But if it went, then obviously that has an impact on something else. And I just wondered how we're looking not just at the play area, but we're looking at all the other bits, and even whether there was a possibility in certain cases for the Parks Foundation to even perhaps take on some of these things if that's an appropriate solution. I mean, how widely are we joining all these bits together?
Thank you. I think it's a really good point that where players are linked to commercial interest, whether that's ours or externally, I think they do play a really important role. And actually, the player is an important aspect of Red Hill Cafe, but actually the paddling pool is as well. And that's outside the scope of this, but is equally as important for their revenue there. Yeah, and I think and we look at other sites in terms of the commercial importance of play. So Queen's Park is another prime example, and the ward members there have we've had discussions on that in quite some detail as well. And we know that the closure and the reduction in the play equipment at Queen's Park in particular has had a significant impact on the footfall and the revenue input at the cafe. So yeah, there's a thread in there in the actual strategy document, and that's another factor that kind of plays into that kind of how we prioritise and how we kind of make decisions about future sites, and again just plays into their importance as well. In terms of partners and opportunities, the Parks Foundation, other than kind of those trading sites and sort of grow zones and places, I don't think they're necessarily looking to take over assets. But others may do. And I mean, I gave some examples earlier, and generally we as a council hold on to the land. It's our land ownership. I think we'd be open to, if there is, like I said, mentioned earlier, business or whatever, any other form of interest, I think we'd be very open to conversations around that. The same as I think we should be around sponsorship or philanthropy and donations and other means of. And it's not just about the money, it's about embedding them in communities and making them, vibrant, viable community spaces. Everything you heard from the Parks Foundation the other night was about the Green Heart Parks model and how getting these spaces activated, busy, supervised, used, that drives away the negative behaviour and the antisocial behaviour, that reduces cost and it makes better spaces. That's the sort of the golden nugget in amongst everything we're trying to deliver, really.
If I just can change my playmark and talk about Westbourne, I was thinking about it when you were talking about drop curbs and access. That's not a fantastic access with a narrow pavement next to a road that's always full of cars, so you couldn't realistically put a drop curb in there. So I was wondering how you balance the. Do you monitor the use of the player? Can you say that this one has this much usage, a bit like we do with the footfall through the town centre, versus what would potentially be an investment needed to bring it to current standard? How do you balance those two?
I think that's a good question. I think quality landscape design is where that plays in terms of understanding the whole space and all the inputs and everything you've just listed. And also, so I think it comes down to how we approach each site. And like I said earlier, some I think will be able to push out quite quickly and just say it's a fairly straightforward, improve the kit in and out, do it as quickly as we can, and we'll make it better. Some, like Westbourne, maybe might need that better sort of bigger sort of design consideration. We're also working with Dots Disability in terms of their input into the strategy documents, and we're setting up, trying to consider how we might use them, work with them, and sort of partner with them through this process as well to consider inclusion and access, and pick up what you said. And again, it's a resourcing thing. We're probably not going to be able to do that on every site, but I think there will be some where we say, actually, that's really important, and maybe we hear that from the community in the consultation. And there's some sites that we would like to get to a really high gold standard of access and inclusion, and where we maybe do that deeper dive into those sorts of pieces of work. How we get to choose those, we haven't got to that yet. I think that's going to play out as we go through with you as members in terms of the next phase, and into next year. So there's a lot of work to unpick in all of that, and doing this level of programme across this number of sites is a fair challenge in terms of how we determine that and explain it and take people on the journey with us as well. So, but I think it's all really key to making it successful.
Thank you for that. And just following a little bit about the accessibility to everyone. I'm sort of coming back around to the idea of what's the most important to different people in different areas around the conurbation. So where we've got areas which are more deprived or people are less likely to own cars or be able to travel to a destination play park, would there be more scope to continue more of the doorstep and local spaces there than consolidate them, rather than looking at other areas where people are more likely to be able to travel, or there's better bus connections and things like this, where it'd be less difficult to get to them? So would that kind of thinking go into which ones are going to be consolidated and which ones aren't as well?
Yes.
Good answer, that'll be.
Part of the that evidence base is number of children in ward by age range, which is all based on sort of the sort of mosaic data and that sort of thing. But we've also got walk times mapped, as well as other sort of areas of that. And so the typology that Rebecca talked through earlier, local and doorstep, neighbourhood, destination, those are then mapped. And we've tried to balance the walk time mapping to understand whether spatially how that works. So yes, but it's quite complicated, and then trying to reflect that on the mapping is quite difficult to present. BCP is a big space with a lot of dots on the map. So what we're probably including in the cabinet and the high level stuff is some fairly, I was going to say, simple mapping, sort of easy, relatively easy to understand series of maps. In behind that, there's another 15, 20, I've lost count, that details that, and we'll probably bundle those so they're available, but we probably, there's different levels of that. So I think welcome if members want to pick this up and we can get into that in a bit more detail, then happy to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe I'd like to pick your brains on that at some point. I think I'd like to draw this to a close because we are running a little bit out of time if no one's got anything else they want to add. I was thinking about making a recommendation, but I'm not going to do it formally. But Councillor Moore, when this goes out to consider, assuming it's getting ahead of us a little bit, assuming that Cabinet accept this paper and take it forward, I'd love to see, as part of the consultation when it's going forward, trying to really get to grips with what is important to people and what types of play spaces is important, because I do feel like that may change as we move across the conurbation, what people use more and what people use less. And I know there was talk at the Overview and Scrutiny board on Monday about how consultations are done and exactly what sort of questions they're asking as well. So just from my perspective, I'd like to, even if it's just people ranking them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what's their preferred, what do they use most often, something like that, just to get a real understanding of what is important, so we don't go and spend $250,000 on a destination play space if actually we could go and do 5 smaller ones which are going to be used far more and be more important to the local community, rather than a few people who might be able to get to a destination, for example. But if there's nothing else from the committee, then I'm happy to close that item and say thank you very much for that. And we can move on to the penultimate item, which is the Heathland mitigation funding, which is going to be you again, Martin, I'm afraid, but also Councillor Hadley to introduce this paper for us if you're still online there, Councillor Hadley.
Yes, I am, thank you. And I'm sorry I'm not with you in person. So this paper is really to summarise the projects that we have in place to help reduce the impact of humans and our pets on our protected heathland around us, and it ties to your first paper about water quality and the nutrients, in the sense that this is a planning obligation on new developments is what funds these spaces. And that obviously is a challenge, because the people who use them are quite often not the people in the new houses. But it's about things like the risks of wildfires, the impact of pets on the wild space, cats on the loose or dogs being walked, pollution, vandalism, and soil erosion, and those things are obviously a real challenge because our heathland is internationally protected. The main strand is about what's called SANGS, Suitable Alternative Natural Green Space. It's not a very nice acronym, but that's what it is. That's what it stands for. And the 4, you've got sort of a summary really of where we've been, where we're going on them. Is the extension to Upton Country Park, Muddyford Woods work, in Iford Meadows, the improvements and linking space together there, and in Cherry Tree Meadows on the River Stour. So those are the main ones that we've been looking at, but also monitoring the use of those and monitoring the use of the heathland, and surveying users in terms of what they would have done if they'd not been in that space, and how they use the space. And what that shows is that 30% of the SANG users would have otherwise been on the heathland. but also that the heathland areas have been seeing a decrease in usage by about 5%, and that ties to an increase in some of the indicator species on those heaths. So Dartford warblers have been stable in numbers in terms of spotting those on the heathland. The nightjars and the woodlarks have been increasing in numbers over the last 5 years, which are hopeful signs that actually the policy is having an impact on preserving those habitats for those. We get to renew our heathland SPD in 2025, so there's an opportunity there, I guess, partly for the committee, but for us as a council to think about how we go forwards from there, what changes to management there might be to our policies in this regard. But it's really about trying to protect our heathland. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Martin, do you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think the only thing, thank you, Councillor Hadley, for that. It's great. And I think the only thing I'd probably just pick out to highlight in addition to that, and obviously the report sets out some of the, and this is in response to the original question that we were asked around the outcomes and success of the projects. And so I suppose it's just to clarify that the mitigation funding that we've received, it comes in through community infrastructure levy and is then effectively top sliced and ring fenced into this to meet the requirements of the habitats regulations. That in turn enables housing development, as you heard earlier from the nitrates piece as well. That funding is then split into two elements. So the first is called Strategic Access Management and Monitoring, or SAMS, and that is the wardening, the education, the awareness of how we manage and maintain those protected habitats environments of the sensitive heathland sites, and also helps to deliver the wider strategy. The other element, which is what the actual original question to committee was the effectiveness of the heathland infrastructure projects, or HIPs. So the money that we receive gets split into those two funding pots, and the report details that. So the examples you've got in there for the SANGS and the HIPS projects, so Mudford Woods at the moment, we spent money in Winton Recreation Ground, and in other existing green spaces, we're using that to try and attract people who would normally otherwise be using the heathlands. We're trying to get them to use other green spaces instead, basically, to try and reduce the pressure on the heathlands from dog walking and other forms of disturbance and pressure on the wildlife, on the basis that that then improves our other green spaces. It might make them a little bit wilder, it might make them more natural, it might be an interpretation or a nature trail or some sculpture or just some signage. And the SANGs obviously also provide new green space. So Two Rivers meet, Upton Country Park, and then the Throop, the water meadows at Throop. I think they've increased open space across BCP by 7%. Just by through their creation. So that's giving people new space to go to and deliver as well. And the outcomes from those is really good in terms of what Councillor Hadley said, in terms of what we're noting and monitoring in terms of the reduction in pressure on heathlands, but also the increased use on those other green spaces that we've kind of improved and used the funding for as well. So hopefully that's just kind of a bit of clarity around that. I think there's plenty more in the report, but hopefully that's enough. But obviously welcome any further questions.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a really interesting report. I was really interested to see the impact of what having the SANGs is and the reduction of the heathland, because these were figures that I've not seen before, so I really welcome it. I'll open it to the committee first of all for any questions or debate on this. In that case, I'll go ahead and ask what I want to ask. And what I was going to say is, obviously, this is coming for a new SPD then in 2025. With that, what changes would you make to what we've currently got? How could we improve on what we're doing to increase the mitigation of the use of the heathlands further, and also open up these green spaces? And I'm going to reflect back on, particularly with the group sang, the idea that was contested was bringing parking into areas where there was already access to those green spaces, but making it more accessible and bringing more people in, and then there being the associated problems with that. So how can we balance both of these things in a better way?
I think it's a really interesting discussion point, really, and I might ask Wendy for a planning comment. Maybe she's willing on this. But so we know that we will need to increase our SANG provision as local plan comes forward and housing development numbers come through. And I think it's trying to get the strategic overview of where the green space. It's a bit like the play discussion, really. Have we got access to quality green space in the right places, and in particular to meet where the new housing growth is going to be? So there's a balance in that, and yeah, I've got recently a request in my inbox in terms of can we use this funding elsewhere? So whilst there is some fairly significant funds sat in the sort of the HIPs and the sort of the fund effectively to deliver this, delivering SANGs are expensive in terms of, if it's our land, then it's relatively easy. If it's our land but tenanted or anything else, then it costs, there's significant cost to then deliver those improvements. And it's also about the linkage to the development and how we get the right people in the right place as well, isn't it? So I think increasingly we're trying to look at ways to use the HIPS fund in terms of improving existing open space and trying to mitigate the pressure as well as improving those as well. So I think it's a broad balance. In terms of the SPD, I don't think there's much wrong with the current what we have. I'd always advocate for more resource so we can deliver quicker and better, whether that's wardening on the ground through the countryside team or in our projects team to be able to deliver and push these projects along faster and use the funding sort of quicker maybe. I don't know if Wendy you wanted to add anything to that, but or see if you've got a different view in terms of how that SPD might come forward.
Thank you. I suppose the key reference for me is what we're saying in the local plan. Obviously that consolidated local plan is very much looking at growth going forward. And we are really explicit in that document, actually on page 12, which I have in front of me at the moment, that additional growth will place pressure on existing infrastructure. And therefore, we need to work with service providers on a whole range of infrastructure. And the first thing that we list is actually those protected habitats. And we note that to ensure that protected nature conservation sites are not harmed from additional development, we need to continue to implement those mitigation measures across the house alongside housing growth. So for the visitor pressure on the Dorset Heathlands, that includes bringing forward the Heathland infrastructure projects and extending existing SANGs at Upton Country Park, Camford, Stour Valley, River, Meads, Two Rivers Meet, Cruxton Farm, etc. So we kind of recognise that that's where we are now, and that obviously that will be part of our infrastructure delivery schedule, which is the document that we've articulated all the infrastructure needs that we think that the growth will do. Unfortunately, that's 3.6 billion, so we're never going to have the money to be able to deal with all of that. But there's some fundamental things that we need to do. So so we recognise it's a challenge. It has been an area that we have had to, again, because I've raised this issue around habitats regulation kind of sitting above national policy. So that's why it's been able to top slice that kind of fundamental need for that to be delivered. Otherwise, to some extent, you can't have growth at all, and that will continue. But that obviously then causes pressure and discussions around how those other infrastructure needs are met. And therefore, we want to be as effective as possible on how we provide that fundamental protection for not nature conservation, but not necessarily always looking at the most expensive options, which is very much what you've just heard.
Thank you for that. Councillor Northover.
I think we've talked before about this, but could some of our really large green spaces in the more urban areas be used for SANGs rather than these sort of edge places that do seem to, whenever I think, I can't ever get to any of those places because I don't drive, but some of our big golfing centres have like really huge numbers of people that would be in walking distance, and a lot more people would sort of benefit, I think.
Yes, absolutely they could, and it's obviously then balancing that land use and who's currently using it and what we're changing it into and who might then use it then, what's the impact of that, and how does that how does that mitigate the pressure on the heathlands? And I think I would agree, absolutely, yes, they could. There is huge potential for a number of sites to do that. There is on the council website, there is a SANG strategy document that sets out options on a number of different sites, and that includes some of those sites that you're referencing. And they were looked at in terms of sort of options analysis. There's nothing definitive that sets out a future sort of direction on those. And as Wendy mentioned, a few of the other sites where we've already got sort of provision. So how those go forward is a bigger piece of work in terms of how we kind of assess and understand what the impact of that is. But there certainly are some options within that, or opportunities certainly.
Do you want to follow up?
Is the seafront able to become a SANG?
Parts of it, I think maybe the cliff tops. You look at some of those natural spaces, and they give you the feel of the mitigation is around trying to use other spaces that feel like you're in nature, that you're on the heathlands. That's intrinsically what they're sort of trying to address, isn't it? You want to take people away from the sensitive heath to reduce the pressure on that. How do you do that? You take them to somewhere similar or create a similar sense of place. And I think when you walk along maybe East Cliff, sort of parts of that feel kind of quite rough and ready and kind of quite natural. I think in absorbing the numbers, they're not big enough to perform a strategic function. Funny enough, I've got a question from a member of the community at the moment about the chines in Poole, about throughout really in terms of the chines and whether the chines could play a bigger role in terms of doing some of that. And I think that's probably sort of a little bit in new ground. I think they're probably smaller HIPS projects that might do some of that. They're not big enough. The strategic SANGs are up around 30 hectares as the target for strategic SANG, which is what Upton and Two Rivers Meet have done. So it's about scale as well, and then it's about numbers of people and population and stuff as well. So but it's an interesting thought.
Councillor Rice.
Just on the seafront, on the beach specifically, I seem to remember speaking to Natural England about this, and the issue of the fact that dogs are prohibited at certain times of the year, and so to mitigate from the heathland, it has to be a provision where dogs are allowed the whole time. That's obviously not the cliff tops. And then in Poole, we have the issue of beta. Can't actually want dogs near the seafront in Beta in Poole Harbour. Yes, no, I just wanted to raise the serious issue of transportation to these areas and the carbon footprint of it. I remember having difficult conversations about it as well in the past, and I seem to recall that there was a policy that transportation had to be assumed that it was by car because we're providing, the whole point is to get dog walkers, and it was assumed that dog walkers must need a car. But this isn't taking into account the seriousness of trying to decarbonise transportation. And so the suggestion of using potentially a golf course within Bournemouth is an excellent idea and fits with being able to be a sustainable transportation and walking. And so I would like emphasis to be put onto that issue. I know it's a national issue as well because everybody's trying to look at it, but exploring innovative ways of sort of, for example, Upton Country Park, like free bus tickets for people that go with their dog to the park, for example, or reduced prices, or just exploring that and just not making the assumption. I carry my dog on the back of my bike in a bag, so there are other options. And my brother has a trailer, so
I've seen Councillor Hadley's hand go up. I don't know if you want to respond to that, Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, it was actually on a previous point, but I can talk about that too. I think it was Councillor Northover's point, and partly Parks Foundation has already been mentioned earlier, and part of their presentation was work around the Little Down Greenway, which is work they're involved in, but actually ties in with our transforming travel and other elements. I guess it's not all down to Sang. So there is something about linking together the areas that don't where people don't have cars, and I've been critical of some of the developments that where we're paying. For instance, we bought a farm in Beer Regis, and actually if you don't have a car, you're never going to get there. It take you a week to get there by bus, and a whole day to get there by bike. But the opportunities, the National Trust and Natural England are both actually quite keen now on trying to work in more urban areas and to have an impact where people live, rather than getting people out into grand country houses or into the countryside. So I think those partners are keen to do other work. It may not be around Sangs, but it is around trying to encourage people out to green space to improve the green spaces. And I think there's some good work that Martin and the team are already doing in that area around trying to improve that. In terms of the cars and other ways of getting to Sangs, it is just a consequence, I suppose, of our heathlands. It's generally on the borders of our area, and that is also where the green space is more readily available to us. But we have been talking about access, particularly along the Stour Valley, and again, it's another project with the National Trust and with Dorset Council to look at not just the nature improvement, but how can we improve sustainable access along the River Stour, and that's something that I've been really keen to promote as well. So I think it's not all down to what we can do through this money. It would be great if we could, and maybe the HIPS money does give us an opportunity to spend some on sustainable access and improve that, rather than. There are national imperatives that we have to provide car parking, and we've got to make it free on a Sang. And that doesn't sit very well alongside Upton Country Park, where the main car park you pay for. And so I think there are some perverse incentives set at national level, which perhaps councillors would be free to challenge or help us to challenge the national plans. But that's the way it currently is.
Thank you. Martin, did you want to add anything to Councillor Rice's? No. Just build on it slightly, and it's probably a bit of a weird question, but go with me. With these projects and the funding which is coming to it, obviously if the idea is to mitigate people going onto heathlands and the damage that causes, particularly dog walkers, is there a way that the funding can be used to, for example, create sustainable transport routes to take more people away from the heathlands, to create easier access to Sangs or other green spaces, like some sort of like mad dog bus or something, which people can use to access spaces which they wouldn't normally be able to, and still deliver that same reduction in usage of the heathlands within the funding? Is that a possibility, or is it particularly just for development projects?
I think it's an interesting idea. I think we'd need to go and test it, and kind of, that would need, we'd probably bring Natural England into that conversation straight away. Something we haven't really mentioned is Dorset Heath Partnership, really key to the delivery of this as well. Not so much the HIPS delivery, because that kind of primarily sits within my team. But yeah, the Dorset Heath Partnership in terms of all the other SAMs and sort of on-site work, a huge amount of education, Dorset Dogs that you may be familiar with, in terms of guidance, code of conduct, working with professional dog walkers with a charter for their use and management and how they operate. They're in 60+ schools across South East Dorset, and all of that sort of work. They also host and lead on all the monitoring and data that we've referenced earlier. So it's probably something I could take to them, and we could sort of consider broader, different, and that's where the changes to the SPD we might look to flex that, I would suggest, and we could then develop those conversations within that review and see if other, because it's not just the council delivering on this. There's a whole host of other partners around National Trust, Forestry Commission, Dorset Wildlife Trust, who also deliver on the heathlands as well. So it's probably something we could take back to the steering group and kind of work up and sort of, but yeah, absolutely welcome the ideas. That's great.
Yeah, sorry, just something that popped into my head. Councillor Hadley.
Yeah, just the Nature Reserve at Arne, they have attempted to run a bus from Wareham to do something like that, not necessarily carry lots of dogs, but to take the public to the space in a more sustainable way, and they've really struggled with funding. So that that's something that they're having to review, and in fact they're also, I think, trying to link it now to Norden to link up several spaces. But it's a revenue issue. It's around subsidised bus routes and a difficulty in terms of, in that case, rural transportation. In our case, it would be urban transportation. But I'm not entirely sure how welcoming our bus companies are to people, you know, carrying their dogs on the buses in especially in large numbers, perhaps on an outing.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the competition is like within our conurbation in terms of looking at green spaces to be sort of purposed for people to come into to take away from there, and then maybe within schemes like biodiversity net gain, and then we're looking at those spaces to sort of take people out of them in order to allow obviously biodiversity net gain. So I'm just wondering, is the competing demands of all those different projects, have we got the capacity for that?
It's another good question. I think that there's a bigger piece here about the land that BCP owns and how we set our land usage of it, and there's obviously strategic decisions about how we do that. So, and you're right in that we need to be careful as new things and all of these different policies, especially with the mitigation, and then putting BNG alongside that, how we're making those decisions. I think broadly they're not in conflict. So what we're doing through the mitigation and what we just described isn't then at odds with the BNG. So what we're looking at doing with the biodiversity net gain is trying to identify other land parcels, and they may or may not be existing green space. So we've got other sort of farms, estate, and other land that we sort of own, but may not be currently public open space. So we're trying to find the right land parcels that might be used to then absorb biodiversity net gain units, so that whether it's our own development as a council or for developers, so we got somewhere within BCP, and that's a key piece of work for us and something we've been at Cabinet for back in September, I think, where we took that paper through. We're trying to set up a vehicle that then manages the financial aspect of that and the sort of the legality of developers needing that requirement to meet that requirement. And we've got the ecology studies of some parcels of land where we might look to identify that. Sorry, it's quite a long answer. I don't think that's in conflict with what we're talking about in terms of the heath and mitigation. It's kind of it is a separate land parcels effectively. Yeah, I think I'll probably stop there because I'm at risk of confusing myself.
Did you get what you were looking for out of that? Yeah, good. Okay, I've got one more question from Councillor Goodall, and then I think we'll draw the session to a close.
I'll try and be quick. There's a certain irony about all this in the sense that Heathland was a man-made situation, but just leading on from the previous query, I mean, when we look at somewhere like Upton House, for example, which has huge acreages of what looks like grass fields, and I just wondered whether or not in order to encourage people to go there, we look at some sort of rewilding or something along those lines rather than, and leading on from a previous thing that we've been looking at tonight, is whether or not we're using huge amounts of fertilizer in keeping that place going. And rewilding, we'd not only encourage people to go there, but we wouldn't be putting stuff into the water. Sorry, stuff is a technical term, you understand.
Yeah, and that question knits together the whole evening in a way, doesn't it? In terms of the nitrates on the fields, and it is rich green, improved grassland. It's not particularly biodiverse at all in terms of the current farmers' fields. I think when we created certainly the first phase of Upton Country Park Sang, it was the guidelines. That was the first one that councils. It was one of the first ones to go in, really. And I think the guidelines at the time were to make them very much kind of natural environments, but they were quite formal in a way. And there wasn't necessarily seemed to be much space for nature in their design. And I think certainly through the latest one we built, so at Two Rivers Meet and definitely out at Throop, we've much more introduced sort of the need for biodiversity in those spaces, as well as then managing them for dog walkers and to do that mitigation piece. So I think, yeah, Upton Country Park, there's huge potential there in terms of whether you want to call it rewilding, making space for nature. Obviously, we, as a council, next year will be bringing forward the local nature recovery strategy as a joint piece of work with Dorset Council. That is very much looking at those types of spaces to make a difference for nature, joined up bigger, better, and all of those things. So yeah, definitely, yeah.
Happy with that? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think, yeah, we'll leave the item there. Been really, really interesting. Some nice discussion points on that. So thanks very much for bringing it and giving us a briefing on it. And we look forward to seeing the development of the new SPD, whatever minor changes may be in that, and perhaps getting involved with it at some point or seeing that paper come back to us. So we'll move on to item 10, which is our work plan. The officers and portfolio holders, if you want to leave, please feel free. And thank you very much for coming again. We really appreciate it. So our work plan, we've got a few things to consider on this, including recommendations from the Overview and Scrutiny Board, which came from the previous budget work group, which we had here. We've got an item which was requested by Councillor Rice, the working group we were discussing before, and a few other bits. So can I ask Claire if you can just take us through this, please, and give us an introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, as you outlined, that we have quite a few requests for the committee to consider this evening. So in addition to the recommendation from Council, which you already agreed to add to the work programme, if we take the requests in chronological order, there was a scrutiny request form received from Councillor Rice some time ago, which is included in the agenda. The committee's asked to take a view on whether to add this to its work programme and potentially the form any scrutiny should take around it. Just to make the committee aware that there is obviously the resource requirement, which was outlined earlier, to only run one working group at a time, but you could choose to add additional working groups to the work programme with timeframes to be agreed, subject to resource availability. I would imagine you'd like to ask Councillor Rice to address the committee on her request form that she'd put in, but I also have some information from the Head of Transport to share with the committee once you've done that. Thanks.
Okay, let's do that now. I think, Councillor Rice, the request that you've given us, do you want to just give us a brief headline on that if you've got it in front of you?
Yeah, I've just found it. I assume this is, this is the one that relates to, there was a council motion before the current lot of councillors were elected in 2024, there was a motion that was agreed in council in the March before that. 2023, there was a motion agreed regarding transportation, and it was a policy that was a motion that was being put forward that was in conjunction with the government policy targets. So it was about highlighting that we take the targets that the government was setting seriously and that we are aiming for them locally as well. And that was agreed in full council. However, we haven't really seen very much work since then about it. So since submitting this request, I have spoken to the Director of Transportation, and I have been given more information about all of the work that has been done in the background. So that is reassuring. Some of the work that Wendy Lane mentioned this evening regarding infrastructure that's going alongside the local plan work. That is basically where I've got to with that at the moment. So it depends on the enthusiasm of the rest of the committee really as to whether we want to take it forwards. But I'm less concerned than I was, but it's such a big piece of work. I think it could do with as much help as possible really, but
It is a big piece of work, yeah, and that's just so we're clear. The request was Housing Council acting to ensure our policies, regional policy of ensuring 50% of journeys by active or public transport. So that's the overall headline. Cool. Claire, you said you've got some information from the Head of Transport on Sustainable Travel that you'd be able to add to that for us.
Yes, it's probably what Councillor Rice just referred to, but the information I've received is that this issue will be largely covered by the Local Transport Plan 4 policy workstream that is already in progress to develop a new local transport plan for the council. There is a cross-party working group in place for the development of the local transport plan, which meets regularly and will be considering this issue. The new LTP4 will not only have policy elements, it shall be subject to adoption, also set out very clearly what the council plans to do to deliver the mode shift to deliver the 50% journey target. So that's the information from Head of Transport and Sustainable Travel, just for you to consider whether you want to add this to your work programme.
Thank you. Councillor Rice.
I was just going to say that with regards to the local transport plan, at the time there was an error that like it's been a little bit slow to get off the ground really in terms of consulting with councillors and having the working group, but then I was missed off the list for the first meeting, and so that was just so I also hadn't been aware that it had actually just started, so there was a bit of miscommunication there. So yes, there is also a working group on the LTP for.
Okay, and you're on that working group, is that right? Claire, can I ask a question? Oh, can we, as a committee, make a recommendation to a working group and ask them to look at something? Is that possible?
Yes, I don't see why you couldn't make a recommendation to an internal council working group. It would be then up to the working group, I would imagine, to whether to accept that recommendation. Just to say, this also does link in to the fact that council have recently made minor amendments to the remit of Overview and Scrutiny Board and Environment and Place Committee. So the development of the local transport plan now does fall under the Environment and Place Committee. So you may want to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah, that was my thinking. And Lindsay, did you want to add to that? I just saw your face appear.
No, I was just ready in case needed, but you can absolutely make a comment or recommendation basically anywhere you like to.
Great, thank you. Because what I was going to suggest is if this is already going to be, if there's already a working group which is looking at this specific item, or they're looking at the local transport plan, can we make a recommendation to them that they do ensure that they look at this, what you've requested, the 50% of journeys as part of their scope of work, and then we will, because we now have the transport falling under this committee, we then ask them to come and report to us about it. So we don't need to form a work group on it. We can ask an existing work group to do some work and then come back to us, and then we can discuss it as part of our scrutiny of the development of the local transport plan.
Yeah, that sounds sensible.
Everyone happy with that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's
thank you.
One item out of the way. No, thank you for bringing it. So that brings us on to the next requests that we've had. Claire, did you want to go on to those ones?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Happy to. So the next request came from the budget working group that was looking at areas that fall within the remit of the Environment and Place Committee. They made a number of recommendations to the committee, which was circulated in a supplementary paper. The recommendations sort of go into a bit greater detail and have some reasoning behind those recommendations, but I'll just sort of briefly outline them. And the first one was to for the committee to add a report onto its work programme on the local area energy plan. The timing of that would need to be confirmed. And in conjunction with that, the committee was asked to explore ways in which it can contribute to and support the council in reaching its net zero targets by 2030. So that would be something that would need to be considered at the time when you consider that report. The third recommendation was to add an item to the work programme of a deep dive in exploring options to progress community-owned renewable energy working in partnership with the council. So the committee may wish to consider the form that this scrutiny should take and any time frame for this. So I imagine this may take the form of a working group. And then the committee is asked to add a report on the temporary accommodation strategy to its work programme as well, and the timing for that's also to be confirmed. So they're the sort of 4 recommendations that came forward from the Overview and Scrutiny Board.
Great, thank you very much. And it's probably the right time as well to say thank you very much to the working group who looked at those items for us, which we formed. I was at the Overview and Scrutiny Board on Monday, where Councillor Martin reported back on that. And I think the job that was done and what you managed to achieve in the short time period that you had to put that together was really well received, and the recommendations as they come from members of this committee, I think they're all really good, solid recommendations that we should adopt and schedule into our work plan going forward, particularly the local area energy plan. As soon as that becomes available, we should be looking to get eyes on that as quick as possible. And just for transparency, I should probably declare that while this has got community-owned renewable energy in it, I work for a community energy cooperative. So just to be transparent on that. But if anyone's got anything they want to say about it, I don't know if, yeah, Councillor Dalton Gibson.
Can I just ask clarification on item B there? When it says in conjunction with the above, request the committee is asked to explore ways in which it can contribute. I don't think the it is referring to the committee, but the committee is the subject of the sentence. Is B actually saying the way in which the local energy action plan can? The it is not clear.
Yes, that's correct. It is the local energy action plan, yeah, not the committee.
Thank you. Lindsay, is your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, other working group members in the room may want to talk to this, but I think the intention of that recommendation was that those members on the working group recognise that the local area energy plan would give a huge amount of information on the direction in which the council needed to go to reach its targets by 2030, and that the committee could really assist that by looking at maybe themed areas in its committee meetings to look at how the council is achieving that, what it's already doing and what it still needs to do and what the costs might be around that. For example, by looking at what needs to change within its fleet to help it reach targets, what needs to be done in our housing stock to reach 2030 targets. And that could be an approach that you take to a number of meetings if you were to add this to the work programme. So I think that actually that request was for the committee to do work to assist the council.
Councillor Martin, as you were chairing the group, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, yeah, sorry, I'm sat here thinking everyone here was, you know, because I've got the knowledge of the meetings, I'm thinking, oh yeah, everyone knows exactly what was said, but of course they don't. So firstly, I will just put on record my thanks to Lindsay for steering those meetings, because they were wide ranging, you know, and it was somewhere between 3 and 4 hours total in terms of meeting time, and we covered a lot of ground, and there was a lot of stuff. So I really appreciate the work that went on to sort of keep us focused, because essentially lots of stuff could have ended up going forward. But definitely in terms of the leap, that looks like it's going to be like a really exciting piece of work for this committee. And I think once we've got that, it'll become obvious where we want to go into. From my point of view, definitely from picking up on what Lindsay just said there, for the fleet, I think once in terms of the amount of money that we have to spend potentially over the coming years in order to get to net zero by 2030, and with other bits and pieces, recommendations have gone to cabinet from this in terms of making sure that that's priced in to what we're doing and we understand the costs around that. I think there will be individual items which will come out of that leap, which will say we really need to do a deep dive. You know, could be working groups, could be all sorts of stuff that come from that to say, yeah, this is going to be key to how we actually get, you know, there's some big sums of money involved here. There's some, you know, big ideas, and how do we actually get to how can we contribute to getting to the bottom of that? So I think that will become clearer, but it was obvious from the work that we did that, yeah, definitely like the money needs to be spent on fleet renewal over coming years and going, you know, net zero through that method. You know, that's a big piece of work. So that'll be things that we'll be looking at, and that'll become clearer with that report, I believe.
Thank you for that. So we're going to get a lot busier when we get that. Councillor Rice.
Yeah, something in point 2, which is regards to the council's fleet of vehicles and getting to the net zero target. Something that was well, that I found particularly interesting, and something that we could look at, is the refuse vehicles, and it was projected, we'll find out more information about this, but it was projected that it was going to take up sort of like a third of the whole budget, in terms of providing vehicles that are potentially electric or carbon or offsetting them. Well, no, it was mostly purchasing electric vehicles actually. But the interesting thing that I find from that is the link, like the huge expense on transporting waste, and then the linkage to the council having to spend an awful lot of money on paying to get rid of this waste. You wouldn't have a business that is focused on collecting waste and then paying to get rid of it. Whereas before, sort of going back 10 years ago, the council used to make money out of its recycling, or at least its recycling, whereas now we're even having to pay to get rid of our recycling. So it really makes no sort of commercial, sort of no financial sense. And then linked into that is the incineration of waste, which locally is very, very relevant. And so it was looking at waste streams in general and how we deal with them in a strategic way, and much more community focus on how do you want us to deal with your waste? Do you want us to lobby government to make sure that you're not actually producing waste so that you're not having to then pay to get rid of it, sort of thing. So it was a big thing, but very relevant for local authority and our finances going forward.
I hear exactly what you're saying. I think you've diverged a little bit from what we're discussing to say that maybe we should be looking at the waste strategy as well, again, as it's coming forward. I think we've not seen it for a while, so it may be something else which we want to add in. On these recommendations from our working group and the Overview and Scrutiny Board, are we happy to adopt all of these? I don't see a reason not to, if we want to take that by consensus, that we adopt them and then we can see where they fit into our work plan. I think 1, 2, 3 of them all have timings to be confirmed anyway, so we wouldn't need to put anything in urgently. The one that doesn't is the deep dive exploring options to progress the community-owned renewable energy working in partnership, which we may wish to consider the form that this scrutiny should take and the time frame for it. So again, it's not something which is being asked for immediately, but to put into our work plan for the future. Is everyone okay to take that by consensus? Unless you want to suggest something different, Councillor Rice.
Well, unless we have a quick chat about it now.
Which item would you want to?
The deep dive, how would we explore that? We could have a quick chat on it now.
Okay, if we can do that. So if we want to accept those recommendations, first of all, so it becomes part of the work plan, and then we can talk about what the work plan looks like. Okay, so let's open it up to that then, I think. I think that's where we can go. What do we want our work plan to look for? So now we've got 2 items, as far as I can see, which want to be taken. We've got the safer accommodation, which we spoke about earlier, and the community-owned renewable energy strand as well. I suppose the first bit, the community-owned renewable energy, what would we want that piece of work to look like? Would it be a working group, task and finish, or just looking for a report from a directorate? Has anyone got any suggestions? Councillor Rice.
Looking at those options in paragraph 13, the one that sticks out to me is inquiry day. So getting anybody interested in community-owned renewable energy in the whole of BCP and Dorset probably, and inviting them along to a general discussion. But we haven't had an inquiry day, so.
We have not had an inquiry day, you are right. We were going to have one on housing, but I think that took a slightly different route at the moment. I've got no problem with seeing that piece of work become an inquiry day at some point. I think we could probably invite numerous external bodies into that. I'm particularly thinking Dorset Community Energy, for example, Solar for Schools, community energy type initiatives, which can come and present to us, and that could form the basis of where we start that piece of work, if that sounds like something we'd want to do as a committee. Well, I'll take that as overwhelming enthusiasm from everyone. So we can put that in. I won't at the moment, maybe not put a date to it, just because I want to talk about the safer accommodation bit. And if we want to start that, we have agreed to create that working group. We just need to agree now whether we want to take that as the next item, which we want to work on as a committee, and progress that tonight, and agree to progress that so that can report back to us in February or an additional meeting. Councillor Martin.
Can I just ask a technical question, which I probably should have asked earlier when we first dealt with this item? But obviously still as a newish councillor, how standard is that from a overview and scrutiny committee that we're sending away a working group that is drawing members from outside, potentially largely from outside of the working group? Because I'm also mindful that housing does seem to be an issue where lots of people sort of want to, get involved and almost step into each other's territories across the different overview and scrutiny boards. So as we keep sort of referring it to as our working group and our piece of work, which obviously that's where it's been deemed that it has to come back to here. I'm just wondering how common that is in that process itself.
So I can't speak for how common it is. I do know that we can draw members for our working groups from anywhere as long as they're reporting back to us. As for what that looks like in the terms of scrutiny, can I ask Lindsay if you can comment on that, please?
Yeah, just if it gives a bit of reassurance to the committee. I did talk this through with the monitoring officer prior to this meeting, and her view was that it's perfectly acceptable for the committee to establish the group, but to take the approach that you agreed earlier, which is to ask group leaders for nominations. And indeed, the majority of the membership of the group does not have to be from within your committee if you take that approach. With other working groups, it's quite standard to invite other members in if needed to increase membership, or indeed there may well be people who are not on your committee or on any scrutiny committee that can really add value to a group. So I think it's acceptable. This may be a slightly different approach from what you're used to, but monitoring officer is certainly comfortable with it.
Thank you. Personally, I think as this came from a recommendation council and we've taken the work because it fits under the directorates which we look at, I'm fairly comfortable with it being members from not within this group, but I would ask that ideally all of you express an interest to your group leaders to be part of this, because I think the experience that you've got and we've all got of being on this committee and the right sort of questions to ask in these, and it's particularly to directors which we've built up a relationship with and we know who are doing this and we've got the background of the other bits of work, I would encourage you all to express an interest in being part of it, definitely. Councillor Northover.
I think that's right, actually, because we all spend time and we've invested in being part of this, and it sort of does feel a little bit like, oh, that's something I'm really interested in, and it's suddenly being dealt with out away from us. So I do think actually it is important that people who are on this committee get a bit of a first look in.
Councillor Rice.
Contrary to that, I was on the local plan working group that was set up by the Overview and Scrutiny Board previously, and it had to report back to Overview and Scrutiny, but I wasn't a member of the Overview and Scrutiny, but I appreciated it as a member that wasn't on the Scrutiny, being able to get on to that piece of work. So yeah, for me at that time, it was my passion sort of, it was just really appreciated that I was able to do that.
Thank you for that. Anyone else want to add anything to the discussion on this? So the main ask then, do we want to form this group as discussed and form this working group tonight with the intention of reporting back to our February meeting, if not the February meeting, then to a additional meeting? Yeah, okay, consensus, all agreed? Okay, thank you. I'll take that away and I will ask group leaders to get in touch with me to nominate members from their groups. And again, please do express your interest if you are, because I think we've got a lot of knowledge and experience in this room. And I think it'd be a shame to at least not have a couple of members who are sitting here tonight as part of that working group. Is that everything that we've got, Claire, or is there anything else for this item?
That's more or less everything, Chair. As I mentioned earlier, Council did agree that minor amendment to the terms of reference for environment and place, and the Overview and Scrutiny Board did have the local transport plan development as an item on its work programme previously. So it's up to the Environment and Place Committee to consider whether you wish to include that within your work programme.
Is everyone happy that we take that on? I think that was pretty much unanimous here. Okay, in that case then, I think all it leaves me to say is the date of the next meeting, which is Wednesday, the 26th of February, when hopefully we'll be hearing from our newly formed working group. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you anyone who was listening at home. Thank you to all the officers who presented and to the Democratic Services officers as well for supporting us. And good night.